I sat at that dinner table, the stem of my wine glass trembling between my fingers, as my son's wife smiled sweetly and told me not to make a scene. The room went still, her parents watching like it was theater, waiting for me to blush, to stammer, to shrink. I didn't. I just folded my napkin, placed it neatly beside my untouched plate, and smiled back. After raising her husband, after hosting every holiday, after being the woman who kept his world stitched together, she thought she could shame me into silence. She was wrong. I don't raise my voice to make a scene. I document one. Before we begin, may I ask, where in this big, beautiful world are you listening from? It's always a quiet honor to know who's sharing this space. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. The lighting in Bouchard's was soft gold, more designed for Instagram stories than for reading menus. A wall of wine bottles shimmered behind glass, and waiters in jet black aprons glided silently like stagehands. It was the kind of place where entrees didn't have prices, and eye contact with the sommelier felt like a credit check. Nancy adjusted her seat, legs crossed neatly at the ankle, hands folded in her lap. She wore a navy sheath dress, modest but well-fitted, and an earnest smile she'd practiced in the Uber ride over. Her purse, a pale yellow leather satchel she'd found last weekend at an antique shop on Hillard Street, rested gently on the edge of the table. Melissa's eyes found it within seconds. "Oh my God," she laughed, her voice loud enough to turn a nearby couple's heads. "That purse is, what is it, vintage? Or like, pre-vintage?" Nancy blinked once. Yes, I found it at a little shop near my place." Melissa wrinkled her nose like the purse had a smell. "It looks like something my grandmother would have used. No offense, it's just quaint." Nancy's smile didn't crack. "None taken." Paul cleared his throat and reached for his water. His jaw worked, grinding something invisible. His parents didn't look up from their phones. Claire, sitting diagonally across the table, tapped her screen. Her phone leaned casually against her glass, angled just right to capture the scene in 4K. She didn't say anything, didn't need to. The moment had already said too much. "Anyway," Melissa went on, twirling a lock of hair around her French manicured finger, "I just think if you're going to be meeting Paul's parents, you'd want to elevate, you know? Not show up like you wandered out of a PTA meeting in Iowa." Paul inhaled through his nose and looked down at his lap. Nancy folded her napkin slowly, deliberately, and placed it on the table. Her face was calm, but her chest tightened beneath the surface like a bridge under strain. "Melissa," Paul said softly, but his voice disappeared beneath the clink of cutlery and soft jazz. Nancy turned to his mother, who still hadn't looked up. "Mrs. Langford, I enjoyed the Pinot recommendation. Thank you." Mrs. Langford gave a polite, distracted smile, still scrolling. Mr. Langford reached for the breadbasket without a word. The meal continued in choreographed silence. Only Melissa spoke, fluttering from topic to topic like a smug bee drunk on the sound of her own buzz. She mentioned designer names like they were old friends and peppered in phrases like generational wealth and legacy building without irony. Claire kept her phone recording, unnoticed. When dessert came, some deconstructed almond tart that looked like it had been hit by a sledgehammer of creativity, Nancy simply shook her head when the waiter offered her a plate. "Too sweet?" Melissa asked, lips puckered in mock concern. "Or just not part of your usual palate?" Nancy smiled at her. Not with her mouth, with her eyes, cold, flat, unshaken. Later that night, back at June's tiny kitchen, with its chipped white cabinets and hanging plants wilting from lack of sunlight, Nancy sat at the table holding a mug of chamomile tea she hadn't touched. June watched her, her face unreadable as usual. Wrapped in one of her oversized cardigans and peeling a clementine with slow, surgeon-like precision. "You should have said something," June said, finally. "I did," Nancy replied, "by saying nothing." June popped a piece of fruit into her mouth. "Silence is elegant, but paper holds ink." Nancy looked down at the untouched mug. "What does that mean?" "It means," June said, "you don't fight noise with shouting, you fight it with ink." The next morning, Nancy opened her laptop and created a new folder. Inside, she named a blank document, langfordlegacy.docs. She cracked her knuckles once, then began to type. The bank smelled like artificial citrus and printer toner. Soft jazz trickled from ceiling speakers, and the fluorescent lights flattened everything they touched. Nancy sat in a vinyl chair across from a banker whose tie was too tight and smile too trained. "Can you confirm the last 3 transactions on the joint account?" she asked. Her voice calm, clipped, surgical. The man, Ethan, according to his nameplate, typed quickly. The screen reflected blue across his glasses. "Let's see." He squinted. "Looks like 3 days ago, the balance was moved into a new private account. Entirely. Around $48,000. Same bank." Nancy's jaw stayed still, but something under her left eye twitched. "Whose name is the new account under?" "Paul Langford," Ethan said without hesitation. "Do you want to speak with him about this? Since well, he was the primary holder." "I was a joint holder," she interrupted coolly. "And I want a full printed log. All transactions from the past 90 days. With timestamps." Ethan hesitated, then nodded. "I'll get that started. It might take a minute." She watched him disappear behind a glass door, the shuffle of his dress shoes soft as betrayal. Nancy looked around the lobby. A couple was arguing near the teller line. A kid sat on the floor, watching something loud on a tablet. And in her lap, her phone buzzed. 3 short pings. "Claire, check this out. She's posting about it." "You're gonna want receipts of your own." Nancy tapped the link. Melissa, on Instagram stories, lips glossed, wine glass in hand, bragging. Finally getting his accounts in order. You know how men are. Delegating all the grown-up stuff to us eventually. Pakistan power couple. The next clip showed a blurry screen. Bank interface. Paul's name on the top. Melissa giggling. "Ladies, marry rich, but manage smarter." Nancy's mouth stayed closed, but her fingers moved fast. She saved the videos, screenshotted each frame, backed them up twice, then opened a new folder. 2. Financial Timeline subfolder. 2A. Evidence. Video. Social. Screenshots. By the time Ethan returned with the transaction printouts, she had already filed everything under color-coded tags. He slid the stack toward her like it was dangerous. "Is there anything else you'd like to do today, Ms. Rowe?" She ran her finger down the final page. The money had been moved at 2:37 a.m. "No," she said. "That's all for now." By mid-afternoon, she was back in June's apartment. The smell of burnt toast and rosemary hung in the air. June sat cross-legged on the floor, sorting a box of old zines and muttering to herself. Nancy placed the printouts down on the coffee table, like blueprints for a quiet war. June didn't look up. "That his handwriting on the forms?" "It was all digital," Nancy replied. "No signature required. Just a password he never changed." "Of course not," June murmured. "They never change what they think they own." Nancy opened her laptop. Every file had its place, every screenshot labeled by time, platform, and context. Every bank record paired with a date-stamped log. June picked up one of the printouts, squinting. "Looks clean. You highlight the movements?" Nancy nodded. "Yellow for Paul, red for Melissa." "Good." June leaned back against the wall, then added, almost like an afterthought, "Every receipt is a sentence in your statement." Nancy glanced up. "Statement?" June gave her a half smile. "Not the one you give a bank. The one you give the world, when they finally ask what happened." That night, as Nancy uploaded the last backup file, a new text flashed across her screen. "Unknown number. You don't know what you're starting." She stared at the message, thumb hovering over reply. Then she dragged the message into a folder she hadn't made until now. 3. Threats and warnings, and created a new subfolder beneath it. 3A. Anonymous contacts. Suspect. Melissa. The envelope was glossy, heavy stock, and sealed in a way that said you're not supposed to notice what changed, just that it already has. Nancy slid it open with a letter opener June had found in a thrift bin labeled 0.25. Inside, a property insurance notice from Westford Mutual and an updated beneficiary statement from Sovereign Life. Both were wrong. She flipped the pages fast. Breath caught behind her ribs. Her name, Nancy Rowe, had been removed from 2 jointly held property policies, including the lake house. The life insurance beneficiary was now listed as primary, Melissa Ann Hartwell, fiancé. Contingent, Paul Langford Jr., father. Her name appeared nowhere, no authorization signature, no call log, no email trail. And yet, processed, approved, done. Nancy didn't call Paul right away. First, she scanned and uploaded the notices into a new folder. 4. Policy revisions subfolders. 4A, insurance, property. 4B, insurance, life, beneficiary. When she finally dialed, the call rang 7 times before he picked up, voice already on the defensive. Hey, Nance? I got the mail today. Silence, then the sound of a drawer sliding shut. She pressed. You changed our property policies. Removed me. And your life insurance? Paul, you listed her as the beneficiary. Listen, Melissa said it's just easier this way. Temporarily, just until we figure out where things are headed. Easier for who? He didn't answer. She didn't yell. That would have made it simpler for him. An out. A villain to blame. Instead, she said clearly, you altered legally binding policies without my knowledge, without my signature. It wasn't, look, Melissa's just better at handling paperwork. I thought you were fine stepping back. You've been distant. And honestly, she's good at this stuff. Nancy's lips parted, but no words came. Not because she didn't have them, but because he didn't deserve them yet. She hung up, not dramatically, just finally. Lawyer, June said, before Nancy even finished relaying the call. They were sitting outside a coffee trailer parked near the public library. Crows hopped on the sidewalk like little black judges. You need someone who lives in fine print, June added, before this turns into something you can't fix. Nancy nodded slowly. Someone who understands trusts, policies, estate law. Someone with teeth. I know a guy, June said, pulling a crumpled business card from her wallet. Old school. Name's Henry Cole. He drafted my will after my 3rd aneurysm scare. Makes house calls if the coffee's strong enough. Henry Cole looked like a courtroom had spit him out 30 years ago, and he'd been wandering the suburbs ever since. His office was lined with old diplomas, case books, and a photo of him shaking hands with someone who looked like an underdressed governor. He didn't smile when Nancy walked in, but he stood. His handshake was bone dry and firm. June said you're methodical, he said, sitting down across from her. Nancy placed a small flash drive on his desk. Every file is organized by event. Source material, screenshots, legal notices, nothing edited. Henry plugged it in, skimmed, whistled low. Langford, as in the Langfords from Devon County? Yes. And Melissa Hartwell, from the Hartwell-Meyer Realty family? Nancy's silence was its own kind of yes. Henry sat back. You're not just being erased, you're being ghosted out of paper. You'd be surprised how often men like Paul let women like Melissa do their dry cleaning. And then their taxes, and then their wills. She looked up at him. Can it be undone? Not all of it, but enough to make the rest of it matter. He tapped the flash drive. People forget. Every paper is a weapon if you file it right. Nancy exhaled. For the first time in days, the breath didn't shake. At 11:13 p.m., just as she was exporting red-line notes from Henry's case memo, a new notification flickered across her laptop. Gmail, password changed successfully. If this wasn't you, click here. Nancy froze. Then her phone buzzed. Claire again. Did you just delete your own cloud backups? Because everything just vanished. Nancy's blood ran cold. The envelope was pale cream, with embossed gold edges and a wax seal she recognized instantly. Paul's family crest, the Langford L wrapped in laurels. It felt like opening a memory soaked in bleach. She slid her thumb under the seal and unfolded the card. You are cordially invited to a celebration of love and legacy. Paul Langford and guest. Saturday, 6:30 p.m., Langford Estate, Garden Pavilion. Her name wasn't there, not as guest, not as ghost, just gone. Nancy blinked once, then placed the card into a folder on her desk. 5. Social events and notices. Subfolder 5A. Public invites, formal print. Claire texted 2 minutes later, guess who's footing the bill for the legacy buffet? Nancy called her. Claire didn't even say hello. $6,150 for catering, pulled directly from the joint account 4 days before it was zeroed. Melissa signed the invoice. Same cursive she uses for brunch menus and passive-aggressive thank you cards. Nancy opened a new doc. Vendor list, catering company, Blackbird Table Coffrey. Amount $6,150 withdrawn from joint account. Langford Row, signature, Melissa Hartwell. Date, 2 days post-insult dinner. I need the full invoice, Nancy said. Itemized with date and timestamps. Already sent it to your inbox, Claire replied. Also, there's a live harpist. Harpist, Nancy. Nancy didn't laugh. She just clicked download. The harpist would go under line item 3. Henry's office smelled like cedar and litigation. He didn't look surprised when Nancy dropped the folder onto his desk. Catering, she said. 5 days before the account was drained. Melissa's signature. He put on his reading glasses. They think if they call it a celebration, it won't count as a theft. He began filling out the paperwork slowly, carefully. This, he said, tapping the form's header, is a formal complaint for unauthorized withdrawal and misappropriation of joint marital funds. It's not a criminal charge yet. No, he replied. But it's a legal record. And records don't forget like people do. Nancy nodded once. Good, let's make them permanent. By the time she got back to June's apartment, the late sun was curling behind the blinds like it was too tired to keep watching. June stood at the kitchen island spooning whipped cream into a coffee mug. She sent a harpist? June asked. Raising an eyebrow, Nancy dropped the printouts on the counter. And florals from a vendor we used on our anniversary dinner 2 years ago. June let out a dry chuckle. She doesn't want to replace you. She wants to erase you and wear the space like a coat. Nancy placed each vendor receipt into a clear sheet protector and began slotting them into a 3-ring binder labeled Evidentiary Timeline. You going? June asked. Nancy didn't look up. To the party, June nodded. Nancy pressed the binder closed with both hands. Not as a guest, June smirked. Let her have her spotlight, she said, pouring whiskey into her whipped cream coffee. You'll own the lights. At midnight, Nancy sat on her bed in silence. The world outside was muffled by autumn leaves clogging the gutters and a rain that hadn't committed to falling yet. She unzipped the pale yellow thrifted purse, the one Melissa had laughed at, and pulled out the last sheet of Henry's legal draft. A preliminary filing notice, terse, stark, legally sound. She folded it neatly and slid it into an inner pocket of the purse, then added 2 notarized affidavits, 1 screenshot summary, and a hard copy of the catering invoice. She zipped the purse shut. At 2:02 a.m., Claire texted. Melissa just posted a TikTok with the florist. Caption, some people try to ruin your day, others bring you roses. Nancy didn't reply. Instead, she opened a new folder. 5B, Weaponized Posts, Psychological Framing. She saved the video, then opened another document. Title, Public Narrative Control. Under it, she typed just 4 words. They planned a party, and underneath, I'm planning a reckoning. The clerk's office smelled like toner, mildew, and underpaid ambition. The linoleum floors were streaked with salt stains from early fall rain, and a wall clock ticked with the kind of finality that belonged in courtrooms and waiting rooms. Nancy stood at the plexiglass counter, back straight, heels silent on the tile. File-stamped copy, the woman behind the desk asked, already reaching for the red ink. Yes, Nancy said. Stamped, sealed, and notarized. The woman nodded. fed the first page into the machine, and the thud of the timestamp echoed louder than it should have. Henry stood beside her, dressed in charcoal gray and ready for war. He passed the packet to the clerk in clean, deliberate motions, each page tabbed, initialed, and bound with a cover sheet titled, Emergency Motion for Financial Injunction, Langford Vihers Row, Case C925s, 1142. The red stamp hit again, again, each one like a door slamming shut on the Langford's control. The clerk gave her a tight smile. Temporary injunctions lift the moment I finish scanning. You'll get confirmation in your email within the hour. Thank you, Nancy replied, then paused. How long does it stay active? 10 business days. If you want it extended, your attorney needs to file a formal petition with the probate judge. We'll be ready, Henry said, already tapping reminders into his phone. Outside, the wind snapped through the courthouse parking lot like it had a grudge to settle. Henry handed Nancy a stiff manila envelope. Certified notices, one for the bank, one for the property assessor's office, one for your personal records. She tucked it under her arm, purse strap digging into her shoulder. The pale yellow leather still smelled faintly of rosemary oil. One of June's fixes for the scuffs. I'll deliver these before noon, Henry added. If they've touched anything since midnight, we'll know. Nancy nodded, her voice calm. Let them try. That afternoon, Claire sat across from her at the long walnut table in Henry's secondary office, a quiet room above a bookstore, its windows fogged by late-season humidity. Claire's eyeliner was perfectly even, her hair tied back in a braid that meant business. You ready? She asked, pulling out her phone to record. Nancy uncapped the pen. I am. She signed each page without hesitation. Revocable living trust, beneficiary reassignment, asset protection agreement, healthcare directive. She wasn't just protecting herself anymore. She was fencing off the future, brick by legal brick. Claire looked up after the last signature. It's official. Melissa and Paul can't touch this. Not unless you leave them a key. I'm not leaving them anything, Nancy said, sliding the documents back into their folder. Claire's mouth twitched. You always this cold when you win? Nancy stared at the ink still drying on the bottom line. They wanted control, she said softly. Now they can watch me keep it. That evening, June had music playing, Etta James on vinyl, low and scratchy in the corners. The apartment smelled like lavender wax and something burning slightly in the oven. Nancy placed the signed documents on the kitchen table. June didn't touch them, just looked at the title page. Langford V's Row, she read aloud. That sounds serious. It is. June smiled, dry and pleased. Paper revenge, always punctual. Nancy let out a breath and poured 2 glasses of wine. You feel different? June asked, taking hers. I feel aligned. They toasted. No clink. Just a silent lift of glass between 2 women who knew paper cuts could bleed longer than blades. At 9:14 p.m., Claire texted again. They just posted a his and hers cocktail menu for the party. Guess what Melissa named hers? Nancy didn't respond. At 9:17, Claire sent the screenshot. Melissa's cocktail, the Gold Digger Bourbon, blood orange, splash of betrayal. Nancy stared at the screen. Her lips didn't move. Instead, she opened a new folder. 6. Character evidence, malicious public statements. Subfolder 6A, defamatory implications, naming conventions. She added the screenshot, then scrolled to the legal draft titled Defamation, Intent to Harm. She began to highlight the section labeled Public Humiliation, Strategic Use of Social Channels. One line stood out. If the offending party weaponizes public narrative to shame, provoke, or damage the opposing party's reputation. Nancy clicked comment, then typed, Exhibit A, her cocktail menu. Nancy arrived just as the sun was folding itself behind the Langford hedges, casting long amber shadows across the gravel drive. Her heels crunched softly as she walked, one hand gripping the strap of her thrifted yellow purse, the other holding a square cream envelope sealed in navy wax. She didn't knock. The invitation hadn't asked her to. She stepped inside the garden pavilion as the string quartet hit the third movement of something vaguely celebratory. Lanterns floated overhead like smug little ghosts, and white hydrangeas spilled from every surface, like they were trying to smother the truth. The maitre d' raised an eyebrow. "May I help you?" Nancy handed him the envelope. It was labeled in crisp serif font, to be delivered to Mr. Paul Langford upon commencement of formal remarks. Time sensitive. He nodded, uncertain. "And you are?" "Formerly Nancy Rowe," she said, eyes sharp. "Currently a party of record." She didn't stay to explain. She turned, heels measured against the flagstone, and disappeared into the perimeter crowd like a well-dressed roomer. Melissa spotted her near the bar. Of course she did. She was wearing something too white for someone not yet married and too sheer for someone claiming class. Her hair was curled into loose waves, the kind stylists charge extra for to make it look undone. She glided over, smile frozen, and eyes scanning the crowd. "Nancy," she said, voice low. "Did you come to make a scene?" Nancy tilted her head. "No," Melissa blinked. "Then why?" "I came to deliver something." Melissa's laugh was delicate, cruel. "Still clinging to that paper trail?" Nancy smiled without teeth. "You'd be amazed what paper can do." Melissa's face flickered, uncertainty blooming like a slow bruise. She turned and sashayed back toward the center tent, where Paul was standing with a glass of something golden and a microphone. Nancy found a spot in the back corner, half in shadow, half in view, close enough to watch, far enough to disappear. Paul tapped the mic. The crowd quieted like obedient dominoes. "Thank you all for being here," he began, voice practiced and overly warm. "Tonight's about love, yes, but also about legacy. The Langford name, the Hartwell future. We're building something new." A waiter approached from the side, whispered something. Paul frowned. The waiter handed him the envelope. Paul turned it over, confused by the seal. He cracked the wax, pulled out the folded sheet, and read the top line. His face went completely still. Emergency motion. Account freeze. Case. C925, 1142. Respondents: Paul Langford, Melissa Hartwell. Notice served in accordance with civil procedure at time of public remarks. The microphone crackled in his hand. For a beat, no one moved. Melissa's voice sliced across the silence. "What is that?" Paul didn't answer. He turned the page. Murmurs rose like smoke. Someone near the front whispered, "Is that legal?" A woman in the back asked too loudly, "Is that the Melissa from the commercial?" The pianist missed a note. Nancy didn't move. She just watched. Melissa reached for the paper, voice climbing. "Paul, what is this?" He stepped back. She froze the account. She listed you as a co-defendant. Gasps rippled through the crowd like water hitting oil. Someone started filming. Nancy finally stepped forward, purse in hand, gaze level. "You named me a ghost," she said evenly. Her voice not loud but sharp enough to cut through champagne and confusion. "I just returned the favor, in writing." Melissa opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came. Her eyes flitted to the phones raised, the whispers building. Nancy turned, calm as snowfall. She didn't need to stay. The room had already tilted. Back in her car, she sat behind the wheel, engine silent, fingers resting on the steering wheel like she was waiting for the next move in a game she now controlled. Her phone buzzed once. Claire. "The video's already on TikTok. 23K views in 10 minutes. Someone added violin music." Nancy replied with 3 words. "Send me everything." She opened a new folder. 7. Public fallout, live footage and commentary subfolder. 7A, embarrassment as evidence, social uprising. She hit record on a new voice memo. "They called it a legacy. I'm writing the obituary." The photo hit the Broward County Social Forum by 9 a.m. It showed Paul mid-speech, his mouth caught mid-vowel, paper shaking in one hand. Beside him, Melissa's jaw was locked in horror. one manicured hand frozen in the air like she was trying to stop the world from watching. Behind them, the guests stared, phones raised like flashlights at the scene of a crash. The caption read, "Family dispute interrupts gala, estate drama at Langford Pavilion. Sources say the ex-fiancé delivered a court order mid-toast. Real-life soap opera or strategic sabotage. Either way." Yikes. Nancy read the headline from her kitchen island, barefoot and sipping coffee that didn't need to be strong anymore. She clicked save, then dragged the image into a new folder, 7B, Reputation Unraveling, Public Exposure. By noon, 3 more blogs had picked it up. Claire had already texted screenshots with timestamps. One post had turned the scene into a meme. Paul's shocked expression overlaid with "when you realize she read the prenup." Nancy didn't laugh. She just made a note to preserve each post. Henry fielded the reporters like a man swatting flies with legal briefs. "No comment," he said into one mic outside the courthouse. "But everything you need is documented, filed, verified. We'll let the paperwork speak." When a young reporter leaned in and asked, "Was this an act of revenge?" Henry smiled without warmth. "Paperwork doesn't get even. It just makes things even." Then he walked straight into the building and didn't come back out. That night, June flipped her laptop around from across the kitchen table. Someone had slowed the footage down. The envelope handoff, Paul opening it, the second he paled. Melissa's panic, Nancy's voice, perfectly clear. "You name me a ghost. I just returned the favor, in writing." It was set to a classical string remix of Beyoncé. "Jesus," Nancy muttered. June grinned. She said, "Don't make a scene. You gave her a masterpiece." Nancy shook her head but smiled anyway. "I didn't give her anything," she said. "She took it all. I just sent the bill." Later, back in her apartment, the quiet settled around her like a reward. She lit a lavender candle, kicked off her shoes, and opened her laptop. Her folders, every single one, were intact. Not hacked, not erased. Protected now by encrypted backup. Triple locked, thanks to Claire's paranoia. She clicked into a subfolder Claire had uploaded that morning. 8. Media Proof. Character Deterioration. Subfolder. 8A. Melissa's Mockery. Video compilation Claire had edited together a brutal montage. Melissa's voice, cherry-picked from her own TikToks and Reels. "Some girls play the long game. I prefer the power play. It's just money, unless it's not yours. Marrying up means knowing where to bury the paperwork." Each clip trimmed, sharpened, time-stamped, and cross-referenced to Nancy's own evidence. The last video was the one from the restaurant, Melissa mocking the purse, the manners, the tone. Claire's voice came through at the end. "And they said she was too quiet to fight back." Nancy watched it once, then uploaded the file to her drive and backed it up again. She didn't need to release it now, not yet, but when they pushed, she'd press play. Just after midnight, her phone buzzed again. "Unknown number. You ruined everything. You'll regret this." She stared at the message, thumb poised. Then, without reacting, she added it to her running log. 9 Threat Escalations. Psychological Warfare. Subfolder 9A. Direct Messages. Intimidation. Implication. She tagged the entry, sent, 12:04 a.m. Suspected sender, Melissa. Then opened a new document. Title, Preliminary Case Notes, Harassment Filing, and began typing line 1. "Threats are just noise. Paper is forever." Melissa's cease and desist letter arrived 2 days later, delivered not by email or courier, but by a man in a pressed blazer who asked for Nancy by full name and refused to meet her eyes. The envelope was cream-colored again, but this time, the paper inside wasn't embossed. It was bark-thin, legal-grade intimidation with just enough uppercase language to sound serious, and just enough vagueness to sound desperate. Cease defamatory dissemination of private and personal materials. Emotional distress and reputational harm. Pursuit of civil remedy should further materials be circulated. Nancy flipped the page. No court stamp, no docket number, no teeth. She smiled. Henry read it twice, then once more, just to enjoy himself. "It's a threat," he said flatly. "A flimsy one." "She wants to scare me into silence," Nancy said. Henry nodded. "And avoid discovery. Because if we respond formally, if this escalates, she opens herself to questions she doesn't want answered. Not under oath." He stood, walked over to his printer, and began pulling papers from a manila folder. "I'll draft a reply. Polite, direct, and devastating." The response was 6 pages long, footnoted and stacked with embedded screenshots, exhibit markers, and file references. "We deny all claims of defamation as the materials in question are factual, time-stamped, and self-published by your client across public platforms. In light of our documentation, any legal escalation will only serve to widen exposure and deepen liability for your client. We are fully prepared to proceed with formal counterclaims should further harassment continue." Henry slid the final draft across the table to Nancy. "Care to sign?" She did. Steady hand, blue ink, no hesitation. Claire clapped once, soft but satisfied. "Added the new cease and desist to the drive," she said. "Tagged it under attempts to suppress discovery. Also uploaded the compilation video under a new label. Preemptive evidence release, pending provocation." Nancy nodded. "She pushes again. We go wide." That evening, Nancy sat cross-legged on June's floor, surrounded by folders like a general in a war room made of receipts. Timeline, insult, Bouchard's restaurant account closure. 3 days later, misuse of funds, party invoices, video bragging court motion filed. Day of gala, freeze delivered. During toast retaliation attempt, cease and desist bluff. Each folder was labeled, color-coded, and sealed with tabs, nothing out of place. June took a slow sip of tea, then nodded toward the 3-ring binder. "Your binder's tighter than their marriage." Nancy didn't laugh, but the corner of her mouth twitched. The response letter was emailed the next morning. CC'd to Melissa's attorney, Paul's business manager, and, for good measure, the publicist currently trying to repair the narrative on behalf of the Hartwell family. At 4:17 p.m., Claire got the first text. "Just got word from someone at their firm. Melissa's lawyer quietly filed notice of withdrawal. No lawsuit coming, no teeth. Just bark." Nancy stared at the message, then opened her document tracker and updated the status next to threat. Cease and desist letter. Resolution withdrawn. No further action. Under it, she added a note. Melissa made the mistake of assuming silence was surrender. It was just planning. At sunset, Nancy walked the perimeter of her apartment one more time. She'd been doing that lately, checking locks, checking lights, not out of fear, but to prove she still had command. Control, after all, didn't have to roar. Sometimes it just clicked shut behind you. Her laptop pinged with a calendar reminder. 1 week until injunction review, probate court appearance. Nancy clicked snooze, just once. Let them show up. Let them try. She already had Henry drafting 3 motions in parallel, 2 reactive, 1 preemptive. And Claire had a new compilation video cued and captioned, ready to go viral the second things turned ugly again. Let them bring it. At 11:49 p.m., a private story posted from Melissa's burner Instagram. It was Claire who spotted it. "Too bad the truth never goes viral." Captioned over a blurry selfie. Tears, dim lighting, a wine glass. Probably staged. Claire sent it. Nancy didn't respond. Instead, she opened a blank doc. Title, Defamation Strategy, Rebuttal Framework. She typed, "When lies whisper, facts echo louder." The conference room at Lingford Financial Bank was carpeted in that sterile gray beige, found only in corporate spaces where real damage happens in whispers. The long table gleamed, polished to reflect nothing. Nancy sat at one end in a charcoal blazer, hands folded, her binder open in front of her like scripture. Henry sat beside her, calm as a storm cloud that had memorized the weather report. On the other side, Paul, creased suit, tired eyes, looked like a man who'd accidentally RSVP'd to his own reckoning. Melissa wasn't there, but the tension she left behind sat heavy in his shoulders. At the head of the table, the hearing officer cleared her throat and read from a typed summary. After reviewing the documentation, including digital signatures, bank logs, and fund usage, we find that Mr. Paul Langford acted in direct violation of the co-signer agreement. She turned a page. Accessing a joint account outside the stated permissions, transferring funds into a private account, and authorizing third-party expenditures without documented consent qualifies as financial misconduct. Paul looked down at the table. His knuckles went white. Nancy didn't blink. The officer continued. Ms. Rowe, full authority over the disputed account has been restored to you, effective immediately. Henry nodded. We'll submit routing instructions by end of day. And restitution, the officer added, glancing toward Paul, must be completed within 60 calendar days. The full $48,000, minus legal fees already assessed to Mr. Langford's estate. Paul's voice came out hollow. 60 days? Henry didn't look up. Shouldn't be a problem for a man with a legacy. Afterward, Paul followed Nancy out into the marble-tiled hallway. His footsteps echoed behind her like a history trying to catch up. Nance, wait. She stopped, turned slowly. He looked like a deflated version of the man who once brought her wildflowers and said things like, us against the world. I didn't think it would go this far, he said, voice low. I thought you'd understand. Nancy didn't raise her voice. It went exactly as far as you allowed it. He opened his mouth to reply, but didn't. She stepped closer, her voice cutting clean through the fluorescent buzz. You watched her spend what wasn't hers. You watched me disappear from paperwork. You watched me become a footnote. I didn't mean for— No, she interrupted. You didn't stop it. That's the same thing. He looked away. She left him there. By the time she stepped out onto the courthouse steps, the afternoon sun was warm on her face, sharp, golden, honest. June was waiting beside Claire's car, holding 2 iced coffees and a mischievous smile. Well, June asked. Nancy took the drink. They ruled. Let me guess, June said, not in favor of generational gaslighting. Claire stepped out from the driver's seat, phone in hand. Melissa's parents just learned about the hearing. How? Nancy asked. Claire grinned. Because someone CC'd them on the judgment summary. She handed Nancy her phone. On screen, an email chain. Subject, case resolution, Langford vs. Rowe. Attachment, court finalized account restitution notice PDF. Forwarded to D. Hartwell, hmrealtygroup.com. S. Hartwell, hmrealtygroup.com. Nancy sipped her coffee. I didn't CC them, Claire winked. Neither did I. They all turned to look at Henry, who was standing across the lot, speaking into his phone with one hand tucked in his pocket, like a man who'd never known doubt. That evening, Nancy returned to her apartment and placed the finalized court ruling into her binder, slot 10, tabbed in green. She pulled out the initial bank withdrawal notice, the one dated 3 days after Bouchard's, and laid it side by side with the restitution order. Wrongfully taken, legally returned. She took a photo, saved it to a new folder. 10. Closure, judicial victory. Then added a note beneath. Closure doesn't come when they apologize. It comes when you don't need them to. At 11:03 p.m., her email pinged again. Subject, Notice of Appeal, Langford Estate Council Body. A formal request has been submitted to appeal the restitution order. Response deadline, 14 days. Nancy stared at the screen. Her phone buzzed. Claire, he's really going to try to fight it? Didn't he just apologize in the hallway like a wounded puppy? Nancy replied with a single line. Let him. I've already built the next wall. She opened a new document. Title, Motion to Dismiss Appeal. Precedent and Burden of Proof. She typed the first sentence. When they ask why I didn't stop, remind them, he started it. The office smelled like old paper, pine cleaner, and a little justice. Henry slid the final page across the desk. "Whenever you're ready." Nancy uncapped the pen with steady fingers. She didn't rush. She read each word aloud in her head. One last time. Her name, her assets, her instructions. Not vengeance, not spite, just clarity. She signed. Then again, and again, 3 copies. Blue ink, witnessed. Stamped. Paul Langford and Melissa Hartwell's names no longer appeared anywhere, not as beneficiaries, not as secondary contacts, not even as footnotes. Instead, 2 new lines sat near the top. Primary Allocation A, Claire Bennett Education Fund. Primary Allocation B, Local Endowment for Bryan County Library and Literacy Services. Nancy looked up. "Filed today," Henry nodded. "Scanned, notarized, submitted. No delays." She passed him her old will in a sealed envelope. "Destroy this one. Let it die with them." He didn't flinch. "Already done," Claire cried when she found out, then immediately tried to refuse it. "I didn't do this for money," she said, wiping mascara before it could smudge. "You don't owe me anything." Nancy placed a hand on her shoulder. "It's not about owing. It's about recognizing who stands beside you when the ground falls out." Claire exhaled, somewhere between a laugh and a sob. "Okay, but at least let me name the scholarship. Something obnoxiously powerful, like the Claire Fund for Girls Who Don't Flinch." Nancy smiled. Or maybe just the Claire Fund for Girls Who Don't Forget. Back at June's, the 3 of them sat around the kitchen island. There were no champagne flutes, no monogrammed stationery, just mugs of black coffee and the sound of the dishwasher humming behind them like a quiet round of applause. June raised her cup. To clean breaks and cleaner paperwork, Nancy clinked her mug to theirs. To not needing an audience to make it official, Claire smirked. To being the fine print they forgot to read, they all drank. Later that evening, Nancy opened her fireproof cabinet. It stood against the back wall of her closet, tucked behind an old coat she couldn't quite throw out yet. She placed 1 signed copy of the new will inside, sealed in a labeled folder. Final Trust, Certified Copy Subfolder, 10A, Testament Control, Post Restructure. She locked the cabinet, slid the key into the back corner of her desk drawer, then paused. For a moment, she stared at the closed door, not because she doubted, but because she didn't. The notification hit Paul's inbox at 9:08 a.m. the next day. Subject: Beneficiary Change, Finalized Trust Notice Sender, Colin Fields, LLP, Certified Delivery Attachments, Revised Will Filing, 0895B, Statement of Legal Removal, Prior Estate Rights. Paul read it 3 times, then picked up his phone, then set it down again. Melissa walked into the room in leggings and a silk robe, cradling a smoothie like it was a prize. "What's wrong?" she asked. He didn't answer, just stared at the screen. She leaned over his shoulder, read the subject line. Her smile faded. "You were still on her will?" He didn't respond. "Wow," Melissa muttered. "You must have really mattered." Paul stood up slowly, the phone still in his hand. "No," he said. "I mattered enough to be erased in writing." That night, Nancy sat on her balcony, wrapped in a blanket, sipping tea that had long gone cold. The stars were faint above Bryan County, but she didn't need them to feel lit from within. She opened her phone, scrolled to a draft she'd written weeks ago and never sent. It was a simple message. This is what happens when you try to rewrite someone else's life. They learn to write better. She hit delete, then opened a blank note. Title: Precedent for Closure, Final Step. She typed, "When you close the door on ghosts, lock it with a signature." Her phone buzzed. New email. Subject: Asset Disclosure Request. Hartwell Legal Group. Nancy stared at it for a moment, then stood, walked inside, and shut the balcony door behind her. It started with a whisper, shaky, cruel, and surgically placed. A colleague of Claire's forwarded it first. Heard from someone close to the Hartwells that Nancy's not all there anymore. Mentally. Sad, really. Another message came an hour later, from a neighbor, then a florist, then a former client. They all said the same thing in different fonts. Is she okay? We heard she's not well. Should she even be handling her own affairs? The rumors spread like smoke. No source, no spark, just suffocation. Nancy sat quietly at June's table, phone in hand, expression flat. The same woman who had walked into a gala with legal notice in her purse was now facing whispers that she wasn't competent enough to sign her own name. Claire paced the kitchen, furious. They're trying to undermine everything, retroactively. If people believe this, the will, the hearing, the injunction, it all comes under question. June didn't flinch. Then show them what facts look like in daylight. Nancy nodded. Call Henry. By that afternoon, Henry had already reached out to Nancy's primary physician, a no-nonsense internist who'd been treating her for nearly a decade. They didn't need to dig, just confirm. The letter came on official letterhead. To whom it may concern, I certify that Ms. Nancy Rowe is of sound mind and full cognitive capacity. There is no medical basis for any suggestion otherwise. Dr. Arlene G. Monroe, M.D. Henry scanned it, notarized it, and hand-delivered it to the courthouse records office, 2 banks, and the state attorney general's estate affairs division, all before lunch. He emailed it to Melissa's family attorney with one subject line. You've weaponized gossip. We're countering with fact. At dusk, Claire posted a single image to her socials. Nancy in her kitchen, binder open, highlighting legal forms like she was grading a final exam. The caption was simple. We stand with Grandma. The comments flooded in. Icon, binder queen. That woman runs on caffeine and consequence. Who do I talk to about donating to that scholarship fund? By midnight, Claire's post had 11,000 likes and counting. The next morning, 2 of Nancy's neighbors knocked on her door. Retired, widowed. Book club regulars with firm handshakes and sharper memories. We heard the garbage, one of them said, and we don't like the smell. They brought muffins and copies of letters they'd already sent to the local paper and the city council. Ms. Rowe is lucid, organized, and generous. We trust her more than we trust most elected officials. One added with a smirk, also, tell that girl in the TikToks we hope she sues. We'll sit front row. June poured 3 mugs of coffee that night. Hers with whiskey, Claire's with oat milk, Nancy's black as usual. She tried to call you crazy, June said, because she couldn't call you guilty. Nancy sipped. It won't be the last attempt. Claire leaned back in her chair. No, but it might be the last one anyone believes. They clinked mugs, no toast, just agreement. Then Claire glanced at her phone. Oh, and you'll like this. She turned it around. A tweet had gone viral. Melissa Hartwell's PR campaign just paid Nancy Rowe's lawyer's fees. Good job, babe, June laughed. Didn't even need a GoFundMe. Later that night, Nancy opened her laptop. She updated a folder. 11. Reputational integrity, restored perception. Subfolder, 11A, medical confirmation, public response. She added the letter, the screenshots, the video of her neighbors waving at her front step like backup singers to the truth. Then she opened a blank document. Title, Timeline Review, Legal Retaliation Log. She began typing. They tried to erase my mind because they couldn't erase my memory. A new email pinged into her inbox. Subject, Hartwell Family Legal Counsel, urgent mediation request. She didn't click it yet. Instead, she copied it into a folder labeled 12. White flags, too late to matter. By Monday morning, the cancellations were coming in like falling dominoes. First was the Calhoun wedding, florals, catering, and venue styling, all pulled in a single email stamped urgent. Then the Bramwell renovation. Then the weekly newsletter sponsor from the local Interior Design Guild. By noon, Hartwell Meyer Creative had lost 6 clients and 3 pending contracts. Melissa stared at her inbox, fists clenched around her phone like she could squeeze the messages out of existence. One subject line read, Termination of contract, pending legal clarification. Another, more pointed. We don't do business with families under investigation. She slammed her phone on the countertop. They're eating up the rumors like they're facts. Paul stood at the edge of the kitchen island, suitcase half packed on the floor beside him. They're not rumors anymore, Mel. She glared at him. What's that supposed to mean? He hesitated. It means Nancy didn't lie, and now everyone knows it. Melissa let out a brittle laugh. Oh, so now you're on her side again? I'm not on anyone's side, he muttered, picking up a rolled tie from the floor. I'm just trying to get out while there's something left. Melissa's mouth opened, but no words came. Her reflection in the oven door looked brittle and mean. Outside, a delivery truck reversed out of their driveway, the same company she had used for event rentals. The logo scraped past the window like a slow goodbye. Nancy didn't answer Melissa's messages. Not the email titled, "Can we talk like adults?" Not the voicemail from a blocked number that began, "Look, I know emotions are high." Not the handwritten note that showed up at June's building, smelling faintly of designer perfume and desperation. She read nothing, replied to less. Claire did, though, briefly, via group chat. You're right, we are talking like adults. That's why there's a folder for every lie you printed and every cent you took. Melissa didn't reply. On Thursday, Henry called Nancy from the courthouse parking lot. His voice was lighter than usual, almost amused. The restitution check came through. Nancy paused. The full amount? Every cent. Delivered by hand, certified, tracked. She glanced at her laptop. They must really want this to go away. They want the fire to go out, Henry said. But they forgot you don't just burn documents, you preserve them. He added, funds will be wired into your trust by end of day. Claire's account included. Library disbursement scheduled. Nancy nodded. Thank you, Henry chuckled. Cash closure, my favorite kind. June baked a peach galette and poured something strong into all 3 coffee mugs. For symbolism, she said. They ate it at the kitchen counter, forkfuls slow and smug. You realize, June said. She just paid for the scholarship that will probably fund a girl who grows up to sue her someday. Nancy raised her mug. To the long game, Claire added. To losing quietly and expensively. They clinked cups. The sound was soft, but final. Meanwhile, Melissa stood alone in the now empty back room of her business suite, staring at a calendar with too many open dates and not enough invoices. A knock startled her. Paul. He held a padded envelope in one hand, his suitcase in the other. Don't call me again, he said quietly. I've moved my accounts, changed my number. You're leaving, he nodded. It's not about loyalty anymore, Mel. It's about reputation. I can't lose mine to protect the ghost of yours. He dropped the envelope on her desk and walked out. Inside was a copy of Nancy's new will, highlighted, annotated, and tagged. Melissa sank into her chair, the envelope clutched in her hands. She flipped open her laptop, refreshed her inbox. No new bookings, no inquiries, just one new subject line. Local nonprofit accepts scholarship gift in Nancy Rowe's name, a donor who turned her pain into policy. Melissa didn't click it. She just sat there, screen flickering. Nancy, meanwhile, opened a fresh document, title, Victory Tactics, Notarized Wins. She began typing. They tried to take my voice. I gave myself the microphone. The reporter was young, mid-20s maybe, with a notebook full of legal pads and a recorder clipped to her sweater. She didn't ask for a dramatic setting. She just asked for an honest one. Nancy chose June's kitchen. Not for comfort, but for clarity. The interview lasted 45 minutes. The reporter asked thoughtful questions about due process, about financial abuse that wears a smile, about what it feels like to be erased in print and respond in ink. Nancy answered all of it calmly. No theatrics, just pages, names, receipts. When asked if she wanted revenge, she shook her head. No, she said. I wanted resolution. Revenge burns fast. Resolution leaves light. The reporter paused, eyes wide. Can I quote that? Nancy nodded once. They snapped one photo before leaving. Nancy sat at the table, calm smile in place, binder open in front of her, tabs exposed, page corners slightly worn, a coffee mug nearby that read, "Document, don't drown. No makeup team, no filters, just her." The article went live the next morning at 7:03 a.m. Headline: How One Woman Fought Quietly and Won. Nancy Rose paper trail, patience and persistence hold a mirror to financial control, and what it costs to undo it. Below it, the photo, clean, focused, unbothered. Within 2 hours, the comment section had turned into a stream of praise, reposts, and thank yous from women who had lived smaller versions of Nancy's battle in their own homes, at their own jobs, in their own names. By noon, it was the most read story in the Briar Ledger's digital history. Claire printed the article and pinned it to her dorm wall right between a Maya Angelou quote and a Polaroid of the three of them from the night they'd eaten galette and toasted to expensive losses. She posted a photo of it on her feed. Caption: This is what strength looks like when it doesn't need to shout. At Henry's office. Someone had printed the article and left it on his desk without a note. He read it slowly, leaning back in his chair, glasses low on his nose. When he reached the final quote, Nancy's definition of resolution, he smiled. "That's better than any courtroom speech I've ever drafted," he muttered aloud. He picked up the phone. "Have you read it yet?" June asked that evening, a grin in her voice as she sipped her spiked coffee and held out a printed copy like it was an award. Nancy took it, read it all again, this time in print. The ink made it feel heavier, more permanent. June pointed to a passage in the middle. She didn't shout, she signed. She didn't retaliate. She documented. She didn't ask to be remembered. She just refused to be erased. June tapped the paper. "That right there? That's a legacy." Nancy folded it gently and placed it in her binder under a new tab. 13. Public records. Accurate reflections. Then, quieter. "It's just the truth." June gave her a look. Truth doesn't always make the news. This time, it did. Across town, Melissa read the article 3 times. Each word hit harder than the last. Not because Nancy attacked her, she didn't. Not once, not by name, not even with suggestion. It was the omission that stung. Nancy hadn't written it to shame her. She'd simply written her out. Melissa scrolled through the comment section. Too many people who saw Nancy as a mirror. Too many who said things like, "I never kept receipts before. I do now." Too many who now knew Nancy's name better than hers. She closed the tab. Slowly, then opened her inbox, still empty. At midnight, Nancy sat on her balcony again. This time with a blanket, a pen, and her notebook. She opened to the next blank page. Title: The Words I Chose. She wrote, "I could have shouted. Instead, I documented. They built a story around me. I rewrote the ending." Her phone vibrated. A new email. Subject: National Syndicate Request. Reprint rights and podcast interview offer. Nancy stared at it for a moment, then clicked mark as unread, and closed the laptop. The envelope arrived without warning. Cream-colored, familiar. No return address, but the handwriting was unmistakable. Rounded, elegant, like it belonged to someone who still believed aesthetics could soften consequence. Nancy found it wedged between a utility bill and a circular for a fall coat sale. She opened it without ceremony, no signature on the front. Just a folded sheet of thick stationery with a faint lavender scent clinging to it like something bought out of guilt. She read it once. The opening line was predictable. "I never meant to hurt you." The next paragraph leaned on the usual scaffolding: misunderstandings, poor judgment, pressure, fear. Phrases like, "It all got away from me, and I didn't know how far it would go." There were tears between the lines, or the suggestion of them. The last sentence: "If nothing else, I hope you know I did love him." And I'm sorry for how I stopped seeing you as a person. Nancy stared at the page for a full minute, then flipped it over. Nothing on the back, no signature. Just that final, hollow apology, suspended in ink. She didn't shred it, didn't burn it, didn't answer it. She slid it into a manila file folder. Already labeled in her clean handwriting, 14. Case closed. Unreturned apologies. She added it to the back of the binder. No commentary, no post-it tabs. Just a page that belonged exactly where it landed, at the end. Claire arrived an hour later with coffee and updates, talking fast until she saw Nancy's face. You got something. Nancy handed her the letter. Claire read it in silence, mouth tightening as she went. When she finished, she set it on the counter like it was contagious. She finally saw the scene you made, Claire said. It just took her a year in a binder. Nancy smiled softly. And I didn't raise my voice once. That evening, Nancy cleared her desk. She didn't do it with urgency or finality, just quiet purpose. The last of the court correspondence went into a secondary file box. Her planner was replaced with a fresh one. The thick binder that had carried months of tabs, folders, affidavits, and freeze orders was slid onto the bottom shelf. She peeled off the last handwritten label, Legal Timeline, Personal Defense, and replaced it with a new one. Future Planning. The desk looked lighter somehow. June stopped by just before sunset, holding 2 cups of herbal tea and a pack of sticky notes shaped like little gold stars. She took one look at the label and grinned. Moving on, Nancy shrugged. More like moving forward. June tapped the edge of the binder. She used ink to hurt. You used ink to heal. Difference is, yours is still readable. Nancy leaned back in her chair, tea warm in her palms. Closure, she said, isn't a door slamming. It's a drawer sliding shut. Meanwhile, across town, Melissa sat in her car outside her former office. She hadn't meant to drive there. Habit, maybe, or some ghost of ambition trying to remember the last time the building had felt like hers. The space was dark, lease notice taped inside the front glass. Her name scraped off the sign. She pulled out her phone. No new emails, no callbacks. The city had denied her small business grant, pending unresolved claims against prior accounts. She looked at her sent folder. No response from Nancy. Of course not. She leaned her head against the steering wheel and let the silence have her. Later that night, Nancy sat on the floor beside her desk, binder open, flipping slowly through the old tabs. She reached the back and found the letter again, Melissa's final word, if it even qualified as that. She didn't reread it. Instead, she placed a new page behind it, blank, unlined. She titled it, The Next 90 Days, What I Build, and in the top corner, she wrote one sentence. Some endings don't echo. They free up space. Her phone buzzed. A notification. Bank transfer confirmed. Incoming wire. Women's Recovery Fund contribution received. She stared at it for a second, then opened her new planner and penciled in a meeting. Tuesday, 3 p.m., Local Women's Grant Committee, initial strategy call. The ceremony was small by design. No podium, no velvet rope. Just a folding table, a few court officials, and the hum of fluorescent lights in a side room of the Bryan County Courthouse. Nancy stood at the back, her hands folded over a manila envelope labeled Case No 09251142, Roe N.V. Langford, P. She hadn't brought the binder. She didn't need to. The county clerk gave a brief statement, thanking her for her cooperation in what had now become a model file for elder financial protection law, a phrase that made Nancy raise an eyebrow, if only because of the word elder. I'll take seasoned, she had joked to Claire that morning, not elder. They gave her a certificate, stamped, signed, official in the way few things in life ever truly are. She took it with a quiet nod. No applause, just a murmur of respect. It was enough. Outside, the wind moved through the trees like a hush. The courthouse steps gleamed in the afternoon light, and Claire stood at the bottom, phone raised. She didn't say anything, just hit record. Nancy descended slowly, head held high, the envelope under her arm like it belonged there. No music, no narration, just the click of her heels and the full weight of everything she hadn't said. Claire posted it with no caption. Within the hour, the video had been reposted 100 times. Someone added a line from the article. She didn't ask to be remembered. She just refused to be erased. June met her at the base of the steps, sunglasses on, holding out a coffee like it was a bouquet. "Well," she said, "now that's a curtain call." Nancy smiled. No bow needed. They walked together toward the sidewalk, the sound of papers rustling faintly from inside Nancy's folder. At the crosswalk, Henry caught up, suit pressed, shoes polished. He extended a hand. Not a nod, not a pat, an actual handshake. Formal, firm. "Cleanest file I've ever seen," he said. Nancy took his hand. "Had a good team." "You were the team," Henry replied. "We just watched you write it down." They stopped at a bench outside the courthouse. Nancy sat. Opened the folder. Inside, commendation letter, final filing receipt, estate restitution completion statement, nonprofit disbursement confirmation. She flipped through them slowly, not for reassurance, but remembrance. Claire joined them with a coffee of her own and sat cross-legged on the ground. "Is it weird," she said, "that I feel like I just watched the last scene of something that's still going?" "It's not weird," Nancy said. "It's just unfinished. Life tends to be." Across town, Melissa scrolled past the video of Nancy on the courthouse steps. She didn't click it, didn't have to. The image said enough. Nancy in a dark blazer, chin high, eyes steady. That damn envelope clutched like scripture. The caption burned. "Paper doesn't shout. It outlasts." Melissa closed the app. She was down to one client. A real estate staging job in a neighborhood 2 zip codes below her usual radius. Her name was off the registry. The grant was gone. Paul had moved to Atlanta. She stared at the blank screen of her calendar and wondered what came next when no one else was writing about you. Back at home, Nancy placed the envelope into her file cabinet. Not the front, not the top, just filed. Alphabetized, exact. She slid the drawer shut, locked it, then opened her laptop and typed a single sentence at the top of a fresh document. Title, Scene Control, Retrospective Notes. Paper lasts longer than applause. She paused, then added one more line, just for herself. "My daughter-in-law told me not to make a scene, so I made one she'll never forget." Printed, filed, and legally sealed. She hit save, then closed the laptop. The room was quiet, but not empty.